know that I'm God. Oh, I gave my life to you. I laid it out for you. You know you can trust me. Surrender, baby. Receive. Remember. Trust. Be still. Believe. Receive. I am God. Trust. Surrender. Believe. Receive. Trust. Be still. That I am God. Surrender, believe, receive. Let me into your heart. Surrender. Oh, let me know you're mine. Remember, be still, know that I am God. Surrender, believe, receive. Be still and know. Trust. Be still and know. Believe, receive. That I am God. Trust. Surrender, believe, receive. Be still and know.
Thank you for joining me in this reflection on trust. I've been thinking a lot recently about being baptized into Christ and what that might mean. It's so much more revolutionary than simply saying we are followers of Jesus because of our baptism, or that we're members of the church because of our baptism, both of which are true. But we are baptized, which means to plunge into or to be immersed. What is it that we are plunged into? What is it that we are immersed into? We are immersed into the Christ event, which for me means that we are caught up in the eternal cycle of life, death, and resurrection. It's the Christ event that makes sense of everything that happens in our lives, even when it is suffering. So what is this Christ event? It's the plan of God in which everything belongs and everything can be used to bring good. Along with most people, I've watched with shock the suffering that invades the tranquility of my living room with the advent of COVID-19. And I guess along with many others, my initial reaction was, where is God in all of this? Some may even have asked the question, how can I believe in the face of this disaster? I think huge questions have emerged in our minds, and some of the cliched religious answers that have emerged do nothing to help. Do I really believe that suffering is a result of original sin? Or that suffering enables people to show compassion to others, and so God allows it to happen as a wake-up call to the world to change its ways? I guess my conclusion, if there is a conclusion, is that there are some questions that I can't answer about the nature of human suffering and why we have to go through what we go through. That would seem trite to some people, almost a panacea, but the human mind can't understand everything about the world, about humanity, and about God. Some of you will know that most of our work here at Irenaeus involves reflecting on the scriptures and unpacking the scriptures in a direct or a less direct way. And so my mind has immediately gone to the book of Job, the Bible's response to the problem of human suffering. And as I read it, I see that there are huge issues which have to be left in the hands of God. I don't know everything. I can't understand everything. I guess for me, the question is whether or not in the face of tragedy and suffering in my own life, The question is, will I trust God? Can I see what happens in my life as being taken up in the Christ event? And can I believe in resurrection? If I can, then there will be peace within and around me. So I'd invite you now to take a moment to reflect on this question. Can I recognize the presence of Christ in my life? You might wish to pause the recording to spend a moment in reflection. I suppose it's important to ask whether or not I will trust in the God who in Jesus became one of us, who entered into the human condition, one who loves and suffers with us. Will I trust in Jesus who weeps with us and who laughs with us? Will I trust in Jesus who suffered on Calvary and yet in that suffering brought an end to death forever? Faith doesn't take away the pain and the despair of suffering. It doesn't give us a shortcut through the emotional hurt, but maybe, just maybe, it gives us an ability to face life with bravery. When you see that level of trust exhibited in the life of another person, it is quite extraordinary. Sheila Cassidy once wrote a book called Sharing the Darkness. For those of you who don't remember, Sheila Cassidy was a member of a religious congregation working as a doctor in Chile who was very outspoken about human rights and who was arrested and imprisoned for some time when she was there. When she came back, she became one of the founders of the hospice movement in this country. She wrote a book, as I've said, called Sharing the Darkness, and in it she said, faith is the willingness to outstare the darkness. I find that quite amazing, and yet time and time again I meet people who have had the most incredible burdens to deal with, and yet who are willing to trust and believe in the goodness of God. I see suffering people revealing that trust day in and day out in hospitals and hospices. Stories always begin to emerge from places where wars abound or terrible destruction takes place, of people who manage to trust in the midst of darkness, who believe in the more when it looks like there can be nothing more. Once again, I'd invite you to take a moment, maybe pause the recording, and just reflect on the question, who can I give thanks for in my life? Who are those who are an example of trust to me? You know, it's so easy to forget the challenge of being a follower of Jesus, to trust in the face of darkness that light will come, to trust in love rather than hatred, to believe in goodness rather than evil. It's so easy to give in to the secular world that tells us there can be no loving God when people suffer in the way they do. It's so easy to rage at God and blame God when faith tells us that God is there in the midst of it all. I have no answer to COVID-19 or the atrocities that take place all around the world or to the individual traumas that we go through. But I do want to learn how to trust more fully in a God who is with us in the midst of all that we do go through, who is present in this world. This God doesn't necessarily give me answers to why things happen, but God helps me to find meaning in life and invites me to trust that there is more, always more, even when the darkness threatens to overwhelm. I first met Barbara Ravenscroft when I was 15. She was a Notre Dame sister who at the time was working in the library of the local Notre Dame High School. I'd heard of multiple sclerosis, but I'd never met anyone who had it. When I first encountered Barbara, she just seemed to me to have a strange gait, and her speech was slightly slurred. Why, I had no idea. She was one of the most wonderful people I have ever known, always full of good cheer and humour. She never let anything or anyone get her down, and even when she was not very well, which was often, she always had a smile hovering around her lips. When she told me that she had multiple sclerosis, I asked her what it was like. And she said to me with that wonderful smile, "Well, it gives me lots of opportunities to trust in God." Never once in all the years I knew her did Barbara lose hope. Even when her illness began to take over her body and she had to avail herself of the nursing care that the sisters offered, she was still brimming with vibrant faith and always believed that in God there was more for her and for everyone else. The last time I spoke to her, I said I would like to come and see her, and she said, "No, remember me as you knew me." I knew that it was her way of sparing me seeing her in the state she was in. She died a couple of weeks later, and I will be ever grateful for having known her and having her experienced her trust in the midst of suffering and darkness. I know that Barbara was a holy woman whose trust in God sustained her. So as you can imagine, the question that matters, I think, more than anything else when we're journeying in faith is whether or not we can trust in God. You see, trust in God is what Ronald Rolheiser calls the acid test of faith. We can know all there is to know about religion and never learn the lesson of trust. Never enter into a faith relationship with the Lord. Religion is all about observation and practice. It's about rules and regulations. It's about knowledge and dogma and doctrine, all of which are fine, but are never enough. Faith is about relationship, real life-giving relationship. It's about that simple trusting and moving with the prompting of the Spirit. It's about falling in love and living in love. It's only with that sort of relationship with God that we ever learn to trust. John's Gospel is all about the ebb and flow of relationship. You find Jesus using beautifully poetic language to express the life between himself and the Father, and between himself and you and I, the believer. All the time, we're being invited to enter into the same sort of relationship with the Father and with one another that Jesus has. That relationship of trust and deep inner life, which lets us know the living God. So in chapter 14 of John's Gospel, we have Jesus saying to us, "Trust in God still, and trust in me." Just take a moment to reflect again, maybe pause the recording, and to ask where you are in learning to trust God. That quotation, "Trust in God still and trust in me," doesn't promise that everything will turn out fine or that we'll get what we want. A little later we find Jesus saying, "I'm the way, the truth and the life." Again, it promises little other than an invitation to enter the mystery of relationship and to encounter the God that Jesus knew. The only guarantee God gives us about life is that somehow God will be there in the mess. Don't escape into a false religion that gives platitudes for answers but really helps no one. Don't use God as a shield from the pain and heartache of life. Enter into whatever life throws at you and trust that God will be there. And so the challenge of faith is always, will you trust God and believe that God will be present, and that simply because of God's presence all will be well. That's what Jesus had to do as he hung on the cross. He had to trust God in his darkest moment, and it was that trust in God that led him through death and into life. That's the invitation each one of us is given, to open our hearts and minds to the risen Lord, to enter into relationship, to learn how to trust in God, and to find life in all its fullness, even in the midst of COVID-19.
So